I'll start by settling the body and mind, moving into class, switching gears, and establishing a broad and altruistic motivation, encompassing the minds of refuge, faith or confidence, and bodhicitta. So analyze in the way that works best for your mind to generate those states. All right, and we'll go ahead and get started. Any questions on older material? All right. So I think I might have skipped. I was looking and I might have skipped a day. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to miss one of the sufferings. So we'll circle back. I think I don't have any memory of, but that doesn't mean much. The day 221, the suffering of birth. I don't think we touched on, at least not in much detail. The suffering of birth you find on the list of 8 sufferings. The list of 3 is sickness, aging, and death. And then, of course, we talked about the list of 6, which is where you have indefiniteness and moving from high to low and being friendless, and that list, we've covered those. But then the list of 8 actually begins, and so day 221 we're a bit ahead of that. We've covered a number of the other on the list of 8, like sickness and aging and so on. But it begins with birth, and literally they mean, actually being born is one of the sufferings of samsara. And it, as I say, on the list of 8 sufferings. So Lama Zopa says, the vast majority of us have no recollection of the sufferings experienced at birth. And so here, he actually doesn't mean, the sufferings of the mother, which of course is true, but that's actually not what's referenced here. That would just fall under the suffering of suffering, I suppose. But this is a specific suffering that is experienced by the sentient being that is being born. So Lama Zopa says, because the mother's mind and that of the baby are not the same, even she cannot fully appreciate the mental unrest of the being within her womb. But the fetus is in a situation that causes much mental and physical discomfort. So, and I can only, assume that like many of these contemplations, that they are coming from what was relayed by high level practitioners that have clairvoyance, and have memory of, you know, their own past experiences in these different kinds of realms and experiencing. Because as he says, you know, the vast majority of us have no recollection. We generally don't remember anything before, you know, the age of, I don't know, 3 or 4. Um, but I would assume that because this is part of the Lamrim, that there are, you know, high level practitioners who have this direct recollection of being born, and the unpleasantness that was experienced at that time. So Lama Zopa describes this as feeling trapped in a small space, unable to move, and then being jostled, you know, here and there, I guess probably over the course of the 9 months or so. And then being disturbed by, you know, the kind of just biological processes that are happening in the body of the mother at the time. Sometimes maybe, you know, the mother might be jogging, or and then that can be, you know, just a lot of movement and so on. He says these sufferings might not be obvious enough for us to discern, but the traumatic experience of birth itself is easily recognizable. And then he talks about the pressures, you know, that are experienced during the actual process of birth, which are a very new, you know, it isn't, maybe you could say it's not objectively, you know, within the realm of different things, not objectively a high, but the that being has only existed for 9 months, you know, or, you know, eight to 9 months. And so as a brand new thing, it's probably quite jarring. And then, you know, it says the baby feels as though it were being crushed between two rocks. You know, so that's, and then he says this intense suffering does not cease once the actual birth is completed. The baby's skin is so sensitive that even the warm air of the delivery room seems cold and harsh. The infant may be wrapped in a blanket of the finest wool, but it still feels as though it is being scratched by thorns. So, you know, again, this is, the baby was, you know, encircled in amniotic fluid for 9 months and only accustomed to that. And now there's air and there's clothing, and this must be incredibly different as an experience. And then there's actually a teaching here that I don't know I had ever come across before, so I can't shed any light on it, I don't think. Where he says the baby often sees mentally created visions, which are as terrifying as those sometimes viewed at the time of death. So I hadn't heard that before, and so I can't explain where that comes from, or because the baby, of course, has been associated with that form for 9 months, and so that's relatively close to the Bardo experience. But um, I I don't have I haven't received that teaching before, so I don't know why the process of birth might give rise to karmically. I don't know if anybody else has gotten more detailed teachings on that, but I have not. I hadn't ever heard that before. So he says, when we see a newborn baby, we should not think it is crying for no reason. So, you know, and again, I mean, this is kind of, all of these contemplations are to some degree uncomfortable, where we're trying to generate renunciation of the ordinary experiences of unenlightened existence. Normally, we think of birth as a joyous occasion, but from the Buddhist perspective, of course, in one way, that being is born into a world where the teachings exist. And so there's at least a chance that they might use that life productively. And so in that way, we can feel a sense of joy. But we also have to understand that it is an ordinary, unenlightened, cyclic existence sort of experience that's happening, unless that happens to be an emanation of an enlightened being experiencing a birth, which is possible. But so, yeah, it's just kind of interesting to also to not have any illusions, I guess, to be clear-eyed about even something that seems only kind of culturally, joyous, and but to kind of see a more well-rounded picture of that experience, and to have a more realistic appraisal or understanding of what's happening. Okay, so that was any thoughts or questions about that? So we can jump ahead to day 225, which is where we are. This is from Lama Yeshe. We create all kinds of fantasies, grasp at sense, pleasure, and everything finishes in disaster. So here, Lama Yeshe is talking about really the energy of attachment, and how we exaggerate. So attachment is a mind that observes anything outside of oneself and imbues it with a pleasant quality, and mistakenly believes that that pleasant quality is intrinsic to the object. Object can be inanimate or inanimate, can be situational, and then feels as though one's own happiness is dependent upon continued, really uninterrupted contact with that object, and therefore strongly grasps and clings to being able to be in contact with that object. And he says we set ourselves up for conflict when we relate to things in that way, because nothing is ultimately satisfying. Nothing, nothing outside of oneself is capable of doing what we think it can do, which is to fill some sort of need, or that we have in our mind. He says that when it moves, meaning like when the object, and of course one reason is because all phenomena are impermanent, all compounded things are impermanent, and so it's changing, and at some point the relationship or whatever it is will come to an end, and then he says we shake. When it moves, we shake. Our mind shakes, our life shakes. So we are deeply affected by the impermanence, because we don't fully appreciate, because the mind of attachment is so strong, the energy of attachment is so strong. We want to hold the object as if it were permanent. We want to believe that it will always be part of our experience, and it can't, because that's not its nature. And so we'll be confronted with that one way or another, even if it's our own death, which is sort of maybe the best case scenario for oneself, is that we can remain in contact, but then during our own death process, we will see it falling away. And if strong craving and grasping arises, then that will, as we've said before, that will trigger another ordinary karmic propensity seed in the mind and will generate another ordinary birth within cyclic existence. Yeah. So then he just says, that energy, of course, sets us up for fear, anxiety, a very tight, narrow, constricted perspective, and which sets us apart from others and kind of puts us on this hamster wheel of chasing after sense pleasures and external circumstances. And ultimately, it never really works. It never really, like the analogy that we've used from Venerable Yunten, like, drinking salt water to quench our thirst. It's a system that's designed to fail. It doesn't, never actually, we just get thirstier and thirstier, and then ultimately we would ruin ourselves. And Lama Yeshe would agree that the energy of attachment, ruins our, ultimately is one of the main reasons why we aren't yet enlightened, because we never created the time and the space in the mind to follow sustained spiritual growth and development, because it was easier to follow the energy of attachment. And that's something that we've struggled with over beginningless past lives. And so it's a deeply ingrained habit. It's a deeply ingrained karmic tendency in the mind at this point. Okay, any thoughts or questions? So day 226 is now from Lama Zopa, but really kind of explaining uh, the same point in another way. The quotation, "We won't be free from worries until we are free from samsara." And then he kind of introduces another one of the specific sufferings. We're not, we don't, we not only suffer from being unable to find the things we like, but also from meeting with things we dislike. So again, that's on the list of sufferings, being separated from what one desires, and then meeting with what one does not desire or does not want. These two kind of sides of the same coin in a way. All our contact with enemies, bad food, unpleasant situations, and the like brings us much distress, mental as well as physical. This type of suffering causes us great confusion throughout our life. And then again, he just, the rest of that contemplation, he's going into the energy of, really is still the energy of attachment, which is directly related to the experience of dissatisfaction, discontent, never being satisfied with the present moment due to always needing to improve upon the present moment, always needing more, better than we have. And again, this sort of hamster wheel, as I mentioned, where we can't really ever keep up with all of the anxieties, the fears, the worries that pervade our life, when we see that life mainly through the lens of self-grasping, self-cherishing, the energy of attachment, all of those egoistic perspectives color all of our experiences and cause incredible pain and suffering. So that's, yeah. Any other questions? I may skip around a little bit because some of these are, I was thinking like, I don't know, I was debating with myself how much skipping around to do, because, the point of all of these, the point of coming at all of these issues from so many different angles is because renunciation is so difficult to generate, and we are so stuck with the energy of attachment. But of course, it's kind of like beating ourselves. It's difficult. It's thinking about all of these things again and again and again. But that's kind of what the Buddha, Lama Tsongkhapa, Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe was. They're encouraging us to still do that out of their kindness, out of their compassion, wanting us to make that time and that space for practice by giving up this egoistic self, preoccupation that is such an obstacle to realization, calm abiding, all of the higher states and things. So, so then again in day 227, Lama Yeshe says, that we're driven by, here he's using desire, but desirous attachment, is the other way of phrasing it. So again, each of our senses is hungry. So this is an interesting, each of our senses is hungry for its own particular food, is an interesting analogy or interesting way of thinking about it, because we, we think of ourselves as one monolithic thing, not to, go too far into like trying to bring emptiness into it. But if we look at the Buddhist model of the mind, we have the five senses, and then we have the mental sense consciousness, and the mental sense consciousness is stained with fundamental ignorance. And so what Geshe Sherab last night when he was teaching, he was saying that the senses themselves, like, they're not a problem in and of themselves, but the problem is that the mental sense consciousness is coming along, right after, right in the moment after the sight, the smell, and so and the mental sense consciousness is stained with fundamental ignorance, and that is what is causing us to relate inappropriately to the individual objects of awareness. And so, if we dissect what a person is, the five aggregates and then look at the roles that the relationship between the senses and fundamental ignorance and so on, then individually, even though we kind of think of our experience as one thing, we can also dissect that though and think, well, but it's also true that each of the individual senses is individually impacted. Like, it isn't enough for me to hear pleasant things. I also want to see pleasant things. I also want to taste pleasant things. I also want to touch pleasant things. I also want, so, all of individually, because we are seeking all of those all of those fields of objects that are unique, because the eye, the ears can only cognize sound, the taste buds can only cognize taste, and so on. And so individually, all of the senses are being, kind of like agents of attachment. They're kind of going out, and we're kind of sending them on missions to go out and interact inappropriately with the environment, and we want them to only bring back their own respective pleasantnesses. We want to only hear pleasant sounds. If we're eating something really delicious, but there's a crying baby, the delicious food is ruined, could be, sometimes. We've all had that sort of experience. Or if we're seeing something that is distressing, maybe it's off in the, maybe it's on the other side, and it's just like somebody who seems really upset. Could be someone we know, someone we don't know, but they're like, really, really just bawling or what have you, then all that's happening is a visual stimuli. But again, it's going to disturb our mind in ways that whatever we're doing is going to be impacted. So it's kind of like we have to have all of the senses doing what we want all of the time because of the energy of attachment. Like, they all have to be simultaneously bringing in their own individual pleasantnesses. Um, mhm.
Venerable, since we are in this physical body, our senses, are they not also what maintains our viability? I mean, aside from all the pleasure we try to get from them, are they also not keeping us alive? I mean, we sense danger, or we smell fire, or whatever our senses is sensing is also helping to keep us alive.
Yeah, no. So again, like Geshe Sherab was saying, the senses are not the problem. The senses, the functioning of the senses isn't problematic. It is the way that the mental sense consciousness being stained by the afflictions, the way that that is causing us to want to use the senses as I said, like agents of the energy of attachment. That's the only part of that that's problematic. We shouldn't, it isn't about like rejecting the body, in a holistic sense. It's understanding that what is problematic is the way that we're driven by the afflictions that are in the mind to use the senses, to have an unrealistic way of relating to the environment that's mediated by the senses. The fact that we can't tolerate unpleasant sounds, unpleasant smells, um, unpleasant tastes, and that it has to be otherwise. It has to be that all of the time, to one degree or another, there can only be the right temperature in the room, the right kinds of, the incense can't be too strong, it can't be too weak, the people's perfumes around us can't be this or that. Otherwise, we feel uncomfortable. There's agitation that arises. To one degree, we might not, fall on the floor in hysterics. I'm not. It doesn't go that far, but agitation arises in the mind. Some sense of discomfort arises in the mind. If things are not all kind of working in concert to support how we think that moment, ideally should be being presented to the mind. If it's too hot, if it's too cold, if there's too much salt, not enough salt, in the food, or, all of these different things. And it all just kind of leads to some degree of dissatisfaction in the mind, some degree of, so the fact that the senses are operative, is perfectly great. And of course, every day, when we wake up, the moment that our eyes are open, we should be flooded, with gratitude that we can see again in this, we've woken up yet again in a perfect human rebirth, and our body and mind are working well enough. Because of course, as you're saying, we can use our eyes to study the Dharma, we can use our hearing to hear the teachings and to hear mantra, and and that's extraordinary, and we should be overwhelmed with gratitude and joy that that's all true. Because the senses are neutral, in that way. They can be used for good, or they can be used to deepen and support the afflictions. They can be used to overcome the afflictions, or they can be used to support and deepen the afflictions. Just like, the analogy of, kind of the snake eating its own tail, using the diluted, using the, in Tantra, using the afflictions to digest the afflictions is kind of the fundamental premise of tantric practice. And that very much depends upon having this kind of body and mind. But it's just to be aware that that it is possible that the senses can be used in service of the afflictions rather than in service of overcoming the afflictions.
That's something to chew on.
Any other thoughts or questions? So day 228 is, Lama Zopa says, as long as we have these 5 diluted aggregates, the seeds of suffering lie within us. So this is, he says, the last of the 8 types of suffering is the fact that we have this body and mind created by delusion and karma, and therefore we are forever tied to suffering. And of course, forever here, we've talked about how unenlightened existence does have a momentum to it, but it is changeable. That, it's not fatalistic. But as we've said, that changing does require intentional effort. It requires meeting with the teachings, meeting with all of the right causes and conditions, and then applying oneself. So in lieu of that, unenlightened existence is self-sustaining. It is forever. Um, in lieu of making that effort. So the word forever can be thought of in different ways, but we shouldn't think of it in a fatalistic way, meaning that, it's truly unavoidably forever in the sense that there's nothing we can do. Of course, that's not true. He says there, we can see these five aggregates as five pots filled with all the sufferings of the past, present, and future. They are the product of past suffering. They are the experiencers of present suffering, and they are the creators of future suffering. Because we have negative karmic imprints on our mental continuum, we create the causes for future suffering, and because we have been born due to delusion and karma, our body and mind are instruments of suffering, bringing us old age, sickness, and death, and the many mental pains we must experience. Whatever samsaric body, he says, that we take in the six realms is only in the nature of suffering. There's no opportunity to experience even a moment of true happiness, and even finding temporal pleasure is difficult. The load of suffering that we carry about all the time can be visualized as a huge lump of red hot iron that is oneness with fire, chained to our back forever. We carry it wherever we go. So there's that. So again, this is all not meant to be meaninglessly self-flagellation, but is meant to spur us on to transcend, to overcome ordinary cyclic existence, and to strive only for the bliss of liberation, to see that as the only good, and that anything else is just a means to accomplish that goal. And then Lama Zopa talks in day 229 specifically about the upper realms, but just again encouraging us to not be attracted to the upper realms, that they are still within cyclic existence. And so there's within the form realm, they really generally don't talk much about the formless realms, because those are kind of like a special case. The formless realms can only be experienced by people who've created the absorption that correlates to that formless realm, and then by creating that absorption, that meditative absorption, they may, if they don't kind of combine that with kind of a realistic understanding of that absorption, they may become attached to that experience, and then during death, that attachment may arise strongly, and then because they've created the karma to experience that realm, they will take birth in there due to that kind of coming together. But you cannot take birth in the formless realm just under ordinary circumstances. You must create the meditative absorption of that realm, and then you have to generate a sense of attachment to that experience. And really, it's not so much emphasized, those particular absorptions. They have their reasons why meditators might cultivate those absorptions. Um, they're practiced more so in Theravadan practice than in Mahayana practice. The fully qualified calm abiding is necessary. Going beyond that, to the formless realms, the formless absorptions, that's it's kind of a case by case. Well, I mean, that's sort of like a personal thing in terms of, should I practice those absorptions? Um, there are reasons, there are benefits to them, in terms of, they're kind of incredibly restorative for the practitioner. Um, they certainly help a person to turn away completely and utterly from any kind of interest in the form realm, in any of the pleasures of life. So in that way, they can orient a person to an incredibly contemplative, meditative life, where they just have they look at anything that occurs within their waking life as fully meaningless because of the incredible subtlety of those realms. And that can be helpful, but there's also a danger that you can just substitute kind of being addicted to the form realm to being addicted to the formless realm. And if a person's not adequately guided and so on, many meditators have had, and not all, anyone who meditates, because there's nothing uniquely Buddhist about fully qualified calm abiding or even the formless absorptions. They will arise if a person meditates long enough and deeply enough. And so a person might not be counseled to have that sense of kind of renunciation of that experience, because that they may not, they may see that as kind of the point. Some traditions might feel like that kind of subtlety, that kind of bliss is sort of the point. And then that would certainly very likely to give rise to actual rebirth in the formless realm. Anyway, but Lama Zopa here is talking about the demigod and god realms within the form realm. So, just kind of saying that there are these two upper realms, the demigod and the god realm, and that there's kind of conflict between these two realms. There's jealousy and so on, and fighting that occurs, but that it doesn't really matter which of those two. Comparatively, the god realm is better than the demigod realm, but in either case, it's all samsaric, it's all ordinary, and there's no advantage. We should see that as only a suffering experience and not even think to take rebirth there, unless it's due to some compassionate wish to bring teachings. But generally, they say that the beings in that realm are pretty unreceptive to teachings. So, but as a fully enlightened being, certainly they're emanating, I'm sure, and trying to reach those beings, just like they're emanating here and trying to reach humans as to whatever degree they can.
Venerable.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a little bit confused with the concept of a meditation. I'm assuming it's a meditation practice that allows you to be in this state of mind, and that if it gives you the insight into seeing everything as meaningless is, I think, what I heard you say, then why would it jettison you into a place where you're grasping all the time? It seems a little counterintuitive.
So there's the desire realm, and then there's the form realm, and then the formless realm. So the desire realm is composed of the 6 individual states of the 3 lower realms, the 3 upper realms, and then you have the form realm and the formless realm. And if you accomplish the states, the meditative absorptions of the form or formless realm, it's only the pleasures of the desire realm that you sort of abandon. But you could just, as I said, you're kind of just replacing the addiction to what the desire realm has to offer you for what the form realm has to offer you, or what the formless realm has to offer you. If you're approaching it from like an egoistic sort of self preoccupied thing, you might be like, oh, this is amazing, like the experience that you're having, because then you come out of it, right? You don't just abide. It's a meditative absorption, just like calm abiding. For many people are generally not absorbed in calm abiding. They come out of it kind of like meditative equipoise on emptiness. They have that experience, but then they come out of it. So for people who have accomplished the form or formless realm absorption, then they're having that incredibly, their body is, feeling like absolutely like a cloud, and there's no kind of ache. I mean, they're just unbelievably joyful and blissful, and and then they come back to this world, and there's harshness, and it's their body is once again kind of feels normal, and so at death, it could be like, oh man, all of those times I had that meditative experience, that was so unbelievable. That's kind of what their mind is going to naturally. Maybe it's not necessarily a fully conscious process, just like the fact that all of us, we're going to, all ordinary sentient beings, almost necessarily during the death time, because everything that's familiar, everything that is comfortable, it's all falling away. It all feels like it's slipping away. And that naturally is going to activate craving and grasping, right? That's one of the 12 links of dependent origination. And that's a very typical thing. But for a person who doesn't have the form or formless realm concentration or absorption as their experience, they can't grasp at that. They can't crave that. And so it's just sort of a more ordinary form of craving and grasping, like, oh, I wish I could still be, having my friends, what feels familiar, what feels comfortable, because of that's just the range of their experience in this life. But if a person has accomplished the form or formless realm, then their range of experience is just qualitatively different. So they have kind of a new option. It's like, oh, that compared to anything else that I've ever done in my life, that's the thing that I want more of. That's the thing that feels amazing to me. And so, and then that's going to, their mind is just going to do that, because they haven't renounced that the suffering. They haven't seen that as something that's ordinary, that they also ought to renounce. That they don't have a really realistic view of it, and so they're like, well, this, I've experienced this, and I've experienced this, and this is so much better than this. Then that's definitely all that I want to now be doing. So then that gives rise to, because the form and formless realms, just like the desire realm, are just part of existence. It's just a naturally, and it's because, as I understand it, the reason that it's a realm is the same reason that the desire realm is a realm, which means that mind is capable of creating the karma to experience that kind of range of experiences. Um, and the mind, and so because mind can accomplish the form or formless realms, then, and because sentient beings are dying, from within the desire realm, there's all of this turnover of birth and death. Some of those sentient beings within the desire realm have accomplished the form or formless realm absorptions simply because it's permissible. It's something that the mind can do. And therefore, it not only is something that you can experience as a meditative absorption as a human, but then also there are lots of humans that are dying in many different world systems, and that's generated then the form and formless realms that you can have whole lifetimes in, after death, and then you enter and you experience whole lifetimes in those realms, and you do that for eons and eons and eons, and then you die from those realms and you fall back into the desire realm. So the desire realm is where most sentient beings are most of the time, because you don't have to do anything unique to give rise to those experiences. The form and formless realms, you do have to create the meditative absorptions, and you have to do it in that lifetime, because we've all created the meditative absorptions in many times over many previous lifetimes, but that karma can't, it has to be in the same lifetime. There's no danger that because 1 billion years ago we created the karma to experience that can ripen in this lifetime. It just can't. It just doesn't work that way. But in terms of the desire realm, it does work that way. Like a karmic seed to experience the hell realms might have been created 1 billion years ago. And that is the karmic seed that might ripen in this lifetime, supported by maybe negativity that we did in this life, or what have you. But the actual seed doesn't have to be created in this life. But for the form or formless realm lifetimes, it can actually only ripen, you know, in the lifetime of a meditator. But again, it could be a Christian, it could be a Hindu. I mean, it could be someone who just likes breathing meditation, because that's really all you need. I mean, you literally could just do breathing meditation, for hours and hours a day for decades, and you'll probably get to the form and formless realm absorptions. There's nothing about Buddhism there's no unique Buddhist teaching or practice that generates the form or formless realm absorptions. It's really just a depth of concentration. It's beyond fully qualified calm abiding. But if you keep going beyond fully qualified calm abiding, you'll generate the form and formless realm absorptions. So anybody, any meditator can do it with enough time and enough effort.
It sounds as though you're saying that reaching that absorption, that level of absorption without bodhicitta is where you don't want to go. And yet I mean, do beings, are they less apt to be motivated by bodhicitta if they're trying to get to that realm, if they're trying to get to that level of absorption?
or at least, renunciation, at least understanding that whatever I'm experiencing here is ordinary. Whatever I'm experiencing here has no value, has no it isn't a good in and of itself. So I'm sure bodhicitta can help too, is certainly, but it's really just kind of thinking that, maybe there's a reason, like my teacher, okay, I'm developed fully qualified calm abiding. I've told my teacher, and my teacher says, well, maybe it would be good for you to accomplish the first formless realm absorption, or, you know, because all of the form realm and the formless realm, they also have like individual divisions within them as well. There's levels, to them, to both of them. So you can have the first absorption, the second, all the way up to what they call the peak of samsara, all these different absorptions that are possible. But I think if the meditator really deeply understood like why they were doing it, and like you're saying, putting it, seeing it as being in service to their goal of enlightenment and only their goal of enlightenment. So as long as they're really clear that this is not enlightenment, this is ordinary, this maybe has some benefit, but it only has benefit insofar as it's in service to my goal of achieving enlightenment, and they're just using it as a tool, and they're very clear about that this, they don't want to take rebirth there. They just see it as like picking up a hammer, because if you want to drive a nail in, you're going to have to pick up a hammer. So, but you don't think that the hammer is like the best thing in the world, or like something that you can't live without. You just see it as, this is my goal, this is useful for this goal, so I'm going to engage in this in order to accomplish my goal. But you never lose sight of actual enlightenment, full enlightenment, and you distinguish it from that kind of blissful experience.
So you have to be very careful. It sounds like it could be dangerous. I mean, a dangerous
Yeah.
mental path to go off on.
Yeah, of course, it's only open to someone who's already achieved fully qualified calm abiding. So, people can sometimes have, what are called like peak experiences, like the kind of the winds and different things can come together for very brief moments, like glimpses of, maybe calm abiding, or maybe something, maybe the fifth stage or seventh stage, or, and then it could, I don't know, maybe a form or formless realm kind of glimpse. It could be very briefly. Um, um, but yeah, for the most part, you really can't cultivate it until you've got, so of course you're quite advanced at that stage, and hopefully, you have a good relationship with the teacher and you can get a lot of feedback. But
I just said to Chris, I don't think we have to worry about it.
It sounds like my neighborhood, or actually the valley that I live in. The billionaires are pushing out the millionaires, and every day I see, Bentleys and Mercedes Benz, and it goes on and on and on. And then the homes, they're probably, some of the houses here are like their third home, their fifth home, and they just kind of roll in every once in a while. That's my neighborhood. The reality for me is that will never happen, unless of course I win the lottery. But yeah, so I don't know. I think maybe that realm, we're already living in it, is what it feels like to me.
all right, so we are at 6:30. So we'll end here, and so we'll end with dedication. So we bring to mind our motivation and recognize that by having listened and contemplated, we've actualized that motivation and created positive energy in the mind. That positive energy will ripen in a supportive, beneficial way, and so we think about how we want that to be specifically something that supports our spiritual growth and development. So try to think about how you would like to have that positive energy ripen. All right. So we will pick it up on Monday. Have a good weekend.